This was the first time, though, that I was introduced to the work of Dr. Hans Jenny. And the caller on the other end was telling me about these cymatic images. And so I was trying to envision this in my mind as he was describing this. And then he told me about a British osteopath, Peter Guy Manners, that he had spent 5 years living in Birmingham, England, going 3 times a week to study with Peter Guy Manners. And that Peter Guy Manners had developed a cymatic therapy instrument, a sound therapy device that people would travel from all over the world to this little village in the middle of England to come as a last resort. And as he described to me some really amazing conditions that this device was helping, I flashed into the future. And I saw that we were walking through shopping malls and airports, and there were little like tanning beds or telephone booths, and we were all popping in and getting tuned up. And so then I flashed back and listened to him tell me more amazing stories about people who were thrown on the medical trash heap, and their conditions were totally reversed with this sound cymatic therapy. And I just became so intrigued. And at the end of this 2-hour conversation, I said, excuse me, why are you calling me? This is really fascinating, but what is the purpose of your phone call? And he said, I don't know. All I know is that he's going to die and nobody's going to know. And I said, okay, I'll get back to you. And as I hung up the telephone, this large angel appeared before me, and I felt this very profound tap on my spine. And so I knew that somehow or another I needed to do something. I was the one that needed to take some action. So I immediately Googled, and isn't the internet wonderful? And found out all kinds of information about Hans Jenny, about Peter Guy Manners. Jeff Volk was one of my first telephone calls to talk to someone. Dan Coons is here in the audience tonight, and Dan was one of the first people that Jeff put me in contact with. Dan, where are you? There we go. Thank you. Finally, we get to meet in person. And so I called my partner, Anthony, on the telephone. I said, I think there's something here. And before too long, I was on an airplane going to England to see firsthand that everything that the caller on the other end of the telephone shared was absolutely true, that people were getting phenomenal results. So shortly thereafter, we had a meeting with Peter Guy Manners, and we began developing his instrument here in the United States. With the help of Elizabeth Bauer, who you heard from today. She was actually the person that we gave the unit to first, and it was her research at a medical clinic in Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we call that Research Haven. And it was her research that really prompted us to move forward with this project. So she's a very valuable member of our team, and really grateful that she's a part of our team. So moving forward, I started to encounter other people who are in the sound healing world. And it wasn't long after that I met Jonathan Goldman at a sound healing conference. And I began speaking with Jonathan and telling him that I was a part of pushing forward the work with Peter Guy Manners. And he said, you know, Peter Guy Manners is one of my mentors. So I invited Jonathan here tonight to help me with this tribute to Peter. Peter is on in years. He is retired. The clinic is closed. And kind of as a earthly, spiritual farewell tribute to him and his life's work, we've put together a short DVD, which you'll see in a little bit after Jonathan speaks and shares with us for a little bit. And so I really want to say thank you to all of you for being here. I want to say thank you to Jonathan for coming here and being a part of this. and part of furthering cymatics and cymatic therapy. Please help me welcome Jonathan Goldman.
Well, hello, Atlanta. Hello, Cymotherapy. How y'all doing? This is a pretty amazing conference. I've been to a lot of them, and just the energy here, the consciousness, the love is really, it's really overwhelming and really kind. So I want to thank you all for coming. A couple of real quick questions. Don't know anybody. Does anybody know me or anything like that, or do I need to say? I've been in this field for about 25 some odd years. I've written 3 or 4 books and a whole bunch of albums and stuff like that. I'm the founder and director of the Sound Healers Association. So I've been in this field for a while, and it's been my great pleasure to have studied with some of the great masters of sound healing when I first got into this, and one of them was Peter Guy Manners. Before I begin this tribute, and I really thank Mandara so much for giving me the opportunity to do this, because Peter figures greatly in my mythology, for want of a better term. How many of you had heard of him before this? Okay. And how many of you had actually met him? Okay, cool. Here's another quick question before I begin this talk. How many of you think that Marconi invented the radio? Well, that's good. Because when I went to school, it was like Marconi invented the radio. The reality base is that the man who invented the radio was, that's right, who among other things also invented AC current, which is what we use today to power all these things. Tesla, he was an amazing man who also invented a wireless form of energy that unfortunately did not ever get developed. It got suppressed during his lifetime, and it never seemed to have manifested again. Another quick question. How many of you have heard of John Worrell Keeley? Less, okay. Keeley was in the same part of the century as Tesla, and he was to acoustics what Tesla was to electromagnetism. It's said that Keeley created a machine that was pretty close to being a perpetual motion machine, except that it could be powered with just a simple, small little toot of a harmonica. This giant instrument would be moving. And stories abound that he'd perfected sonic levitation and had all sorts of different devices that even today in our technology seem miraculous. I start my talk with this because it's important to realize that some of the major discoveries of sound, or electricity, or electromagnetism may not yet even today be acknowledged by modern science. Fortunately, the radio did manifest, whether it came from Tesla or Marconi. But who knows how many other inventions and discoveries have come and gone simply because they did not fit the present paradigm of science and therefore became ridiculed because they did not fit into the accepted technology at the time. So Mandara, thank you for that beginning in terms of your receiving that phone call. Because by gosh and by golly, what a terrible thing it would be if Peter Guy Manners' work, cymatic instruments, cymotherapy, the Cyma 1000, did not manifest. I first heard of Peter Guy Manners through my friend and colleague, Stephen Halpern. Back in the very early 1980s. Yes, Stephen, indeed. Stand up, man, and yo. It was through his first book, Tuning the Human Instrument, that I read a description of Dr. Manners' amazing cymatic instrument, as well as saw a picture of Hans Jenny's Cymatic experiments. I remember the concept of Dr. Manner's work seeming like something from Star Trek. A machine that broadcasts sonic frequencies which could heal the human body. How outrageous. It was exciting. It was intriguing at the time. It was like the holy grail of sound healing. Shortly after that, I actually went to a presentation on sound healing given by another sonic pioneer, Dr. Randall McClellan, the author of The Healing Forces of Music. I can't recall if Dr. McClellan actually had a cymatic instrument back then and that it was present at the demonstration, or if he simply talked about it. It didn't matter. I was hooked. At the time, I had created the New England Sound Healers, which turned into the Sound Healers Association, and thus this very small but very, very dedicated group of individuals explored the area of sound healing together. I believe it was a woman named Barbara Hero, who was a musical mathematician who works with a little-known Pythagorean formula called the lambdoma, who basically supplied me with Peter Guy Manner's address. Since this was over 25 years ago, I can't actually remember if Barbara had actually gone over to see Peter or if she simply gave me his address. It doesn't matter. I do remember the first time that I wrote to him. My first letter, it was respectful, it was reverential. I told him about the Sound Healers Association, my interest in sound healing, and particularly his work. I didn't actually expect a reply, but several weeks later, when an envelope marked Brett Fortin Hall Clinic arrived in the post, I was ecstatic. Thus begins my long and most extraordinary relationship with Dr. Peter Guy Manners. And one thing I want to tell you is that please, as I read this, speak it, whatnot, you're going to have to read between the lines with a lot of things. Because this particular presentation is really entitled The Enigma of Dr. Peter Guy Manners. From the time I wrote back to Peter about my work, my organization, and my interest in his work, somehow through the mail and possibly a few phone calls, there was, of course, no internet or email at the time, so things took a little bit of time to set up. We arranged for him to come over on the first of many, many different teaching tours, most of them centered around the Boston area where I lived. I recall picking Peter and his wife at the time, Marie, up at Boston's Logan Airport. And there with Peter was this, I don't know, it was about the size of a briefcase. And I sort of stammered. I said, is that it? Is that it? Clandestinely, Peter whispered in my ear, yes. But in order to get into this country, I had to tell them it was a piece of recording equipment. I nodded my head. The enigma of Peter Guy Manners was just beginning. So I call this tribute to Peter, the enigma of Peter Guy Manners, simply because the word enigma is defined as a mystery, something that baffles understanding and cannot be explained. This pretty much defines Peter and his work. Before I get into stories, information, events, and material about Peter Guy Manners, I must first frankly state an obvious but important fact. Actually, I have to state two facts for you. The first is that Peter Guy Manners was a great teacher and mentor to me and knew more about sound than practically anyone I've ever met. And secondly, that the cymatic instrument, now called the Cyma 1000, works. The first fact of Peter being a great teacher would not matter if the second fact about the cymatic instrument working were not true. Since I first experienced it over 25 years ago, I've encountered remarkable healings that have taken place through its use, heard incredible stories, and just received incredible gratitude from people who have gotten the frequencies into their body and been healed. So despite any paradoxical information regarding Peter, despite any discrepancies of biological and biographical facts, despite any questions about who or what Peter Guy Manners is or was, the one most important fact remains: the cymatic instrument, now called the Cyma 1000, works. And that is what is most important. Because if it didn't work, I wouldn't be standing here in front of you talking about Peter and the invention of this instrument, because it would be a waste of both our times. But it isn't, because it's real and it works. Since the beginning, I have seen and heard things, healing things, about the use of the cymatic instrument that defy common sense with regard to traditional allopathic medicine. It just doesn't make sense. I guess you could simply say that, along with Peter, the cymatic instrument, or Cyma 1000, whatever you want to call it, is an enigma. But as I said, that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It does. Most of the information about the cymatic instrument has been, to this date, most of it, anecdotal. It either comes from my own observations and experiences, or observation and experiences of other people. This doesn't make it untrue. It simply makes them hard to validate. It's a little like stories of people who have had miraculous healings. And then they get back from the medical community and people say, oh, you had a spontaneous healing or a misdiagnosis or something like that. And to say that Peter was hesitant about putting the cymatic instrument into the hands of traditional scientists, doctors, and particularly the medical association would be an understatement. It's my belief that Peter and these people in these associations had quite a history together and probably had been in struggle ever since the beginning. Perhaps Peter was aware of the fate of individuals such as Royal Rife and others who had used what might be considered at the time less than orthodox or perhaps non-conventional healing modalities and faced major consequences from this. Perhaps because of these past histories of people like Rife, Peter wanted to avoid contact with the medical community. I don't know. Regardless, I am so glad that today Cymotherapy practitioners are taking the correct inroads and providing the correct protocols so that the sonic therapy provided by Peter Guy Manners over a half a century ago can begin to take its place in the world of medicine as a legitimate and useful therapy. So, Mandara, and for all of you doing this work, thank you. It's about time. Providing biographical information about Peter Guy Manners is difficult, if not impossible. I like to say that perhaps Peter believed in what I call the fluid nature of reality, that nothing was static, including his origins. The variance with regard to the country of his birth, the year of his birth, and other data is immense. Huge variance. Many, many different stories abound. Among stories that I've heard include his working in Germany with a scientist, maybe a Dr. Brunner that is referred to in the forthcoming DVD, who had done extraordinary research and experimentation using sound. This scientist apparently had figured out many aspects of the effects of sound on the human body. According to Peter, the German police or government or some other mysterious clandestine organization raided this doctor's laboratory, seizing and destroying the invaluable information that had been collected about sound. Peter claimed to have escaped out the window with some really important papers in his hand. Perhaps they contained some important material related to cymatic therapy. Peter also claimed to have worked with Dr. Hans Jenny, whose Cymatics book, published here in the United States by Jeff Falk. And this book documents, of course, as we've seen, the extraordinary effects of sound to influence and affect matter. According to Jeff, Dr. Jenny's widow knew nothing about Peter Guy Manners. That is correct, yes? And for all we know, he had presumed another identity, or perhaps it was merely a fabrication of sorts. We don't know. But what is most interesting and mysterious for the matter is that in the early 80s, and I'm told that Stephen Halpern said that in the mid 70s, mid to late 70s, somehow he had also observed this, is that Peter had a film of the Cymatics work of Dr. Jenny, or Dr. Jenny. Pardon my Swiss. My question is, how did he end up with this extraordinary film? Where did it come from? To my knowledge, he was the only person that I ever encountered, and at the time, most of the major people in sound were in this small circle. Where did it come from? How did he get this film of the Cymatics? Maybe he was Mrs. Yenny. I don't know, right? I kid. I remember also Peter discussing the work of a Professor Gauvreau, pardon my French too, with whom he claimed to have worked. I had first heard of this man through Randall McClellan's book. Gauvreau had been a French researcher of sound who had been investigating the French police whistle. And he had built a 5-foot-sized pneumatically driven whistle. The story goes that Gauvreau's lab assistants turned on the whistle and died instantly due to the internal rupturing of their organs. True story. This giant whistle, as well as all the information about it, was seized by local authorities in France. A gruesome story, but what is most interesting is that I recall Peter Guy Manners not only talking in depth about this whistle and Professor Gauvreau, but also showing a picture of the whistle. How did he get it? Where did it come from? Again, most mysterious. Other biographical information about Peter was that he had a doctorate from Heidelberg University, as well as Oxford University, and Cambridge University. I cannot validate any of this information, but I can tell you that he knew more about sound and sound healing than any other individual I had encountered at the time. Well-known people with great credentials and PhDs in the field of sound healing were most impressed by Peter's work, and this includes Dr. Randall McClellan, Dr. John Beaulieu, and Dr. Charles Eagle, who are really still considered international luminaries in the field of sound healing. So I was also impressed. So if Peter's educational background was fabricated, and I don't know, where did he come up with all the information he so readily accessed? Now, as I told you at the time we had the Sound Healers Association, I would like to read to you. We used to send out monthly letters. Remember them, Jeff? Right. That's right. And this came from probably 82. Our guest speaker for the evening was Peter Guy Manners. Get ready for these initials. Peter Guy Manners, MD, DO, PhD, LBCP, DD. Peter really liked those initials, I have to tell you. Dr. Manners lives and works in Worcestershire, England, where he has been engaged since 1961 into research into the effects and use of sound for healing. Dr. Manners is considered one of the world's foremost authorities on this subject. He is the inventor of the Somatic instrument, which uses the direct application of sound on the body for healing. This instrument has been successfully used in clinical situations for treatment of many varied types of diseases and disorders. Dr. Manners spoke on potential fields, esoteric and natural, and their effects on man, which included information on cymatics, parenthetical statement, wave phenomena, sound and vibratory patterns, harmonics, and the creation of matter by sound. This was a fact. Peter did indeed speak of the sound healers several times, and whether he had a MD, a PhD, or a DO, or whatever other initials preceded or followed his name, one thing is for sure, he certainly knew a lot about sound. And for those of you interested, this particular lecture is recorded and is available on our listening library at the soundhealersassociation.org website. And with regard, I just have to do a little footnote here about Peter, and he loved credentials. He later became Sir Dr. Peter Guy Manners, and I can almost know for a fact that he was indeed knighted by the Knights of Malta. No, you're laughing, and first of all, my son was laughing too, and I said, "Where do we just encounter the Knights of Malta?" And he goes, "Because we just watched the Maltese Falcon a couple of nights ago." And that's that the Maltese Falcon. The Knights of Malta make this falcon of gold. And who were the Knights of Malta? The Knights Templars. So if you want to start getting esoteric. And there is a man who's a friend of mine. I'm not going to mention his name, but he is indeed a verifiable Harvard medical graduate who has been knighted by the Knights of Malta, and he no longer calls himself Dr. Blank Blank. He now calls himself Sir Blank Blank. So it's really interesting about credentials. So, okay. So I literally have recorded on cassette many days of his teachings, and I will tell you that he was both fascinating and informative. And if his autobiographical past might shift and change as the mood suited him, his knowledge about the healing nature of sound certainly seemed authentic. Perhaps he simply had picked up a vast amount of knowledge through his own personal research and communication with other people, and then claimed that the research was his own. I have no idea. I do know, though, that through him, I first became aware of the work of people like Dr. Harold Saxon Burr of Yale University, as well as the work of Dr. George Delaware of Delaware Laboratories of England. Since some of you may not be aware of these men, I'm going to just take a moment and just summarize the work for you. How many of you do know of Harold Saxon Burr? Okay, a couple of you. How about George Delaware? A couple of you too, okay. Harold Saxon Burr was a distinguished, and I use the word distinguished, professor of physiology at Yale University School of Medicine in the 1920s and 30s. He discovered electromagnetic energy fields around the human body. Harold Saxon Burr suggested that disease could be detected in the energy fields of the body before physical symptoms manifested. Moreover, Burr was convinced that these diseases could be prevented by altering the energy field. Now we're talking about a major professor of medicine at Yale University. This material, which has been published in a book called Blueprint for Immortality, is monumental, groundbreaking work proving that our body does not simply end at our skin, that there are energy fields around us that are responsible for our health and our wellness. Unfortunately, Dr. Harold Saxon Burr, because of these discoveries, was dismissed from Yale University, and it was not until many, many years later that his work was once again acknowledged. George Delaware had a laboratory in the early 1950s in England which worked with all sorts of what we now call subtle energy. Using techniques in the controversial field of radionics, he invented an instrument that could take a sample tissue, such as blood or even hair, what he called a witness, and by using some technology that is unknown even today, or at least unrecognized by conventional science, he was able to produce a photograph that looked something like an X-ray of a person. My friend and colleague Greg Braden has some of this material, and it is astounding. A blood sample of a pregnant woman shows a form, it looks like an X-ray, a form of her as well as a form of a fetus. And Dr. Delaware, George Delaware, he wasn't a doctor, he didn't have any credentials, but somehow he created this. He didn't know that this woman was pregnant. And yet, Andy, you remember seeing that? Just outrageous. The diagnostic tool previously described was just one of Dr. Delaware's invention. He apparently had many other inventions which seem to have disappeared from our psyche over time. Also another person not to forget, George Delaware. Dr. Manners had extraordinary knowledge of Delaware's work and introduced me to it, and I suspect at the time that he claimed that he actually worked with Delaware, and I assume that he also had more than just working knowledge about this. For those unfamiliar with it, radionics states, and this will sound familiar to you, radionics states that a healthy person will have certain energy frequencies moving through their body that define health, while an unhealthy person will exhibit other different energy frequencies that define health disorders. Radionic devices purport to diagnose and restore persons to health by applying healing frequencies to balance the discordant frequencies of sickness. While the frequencies used in radionics are not the same as those in the field of sound healing, radionic frequencies are not measured in cycles per second, but something else. I know that those of us in this field of sound healing will certainly agree with this concept of imbalanced energy. Did that sound sort of familiar? I mean, it's the basis of sound healing and radionics, but radionics, became sort of very much of a no-no when they started having great success using an energy that traditional medicine couldn't define. It's not my intention to provide a basis of subtle energy medicine for this presentation. I do think, however, it is important that those of you in this field know about it. There is a relationship between subtle energy and sound because sound is, in fact, a form of subtle energy due to its harmonics. When the sacred texts of this planet all possess an awareness of sound being the original, basic, fundamental creative force, and they do. In the beginning was the Word, and the Lord said, sound preceding light, said, let there be light. I'm sure they were not talking about simple third-dimensional sound waveforms that fall within our audible spectrum. I think these traditions that tell us in the beginning was the Word, or whatever substitution you want to make for this phenomena, they were talking about a multidimensional force, an energy that we have yet to really scientifically discover, at least in terms of Newtonian science, and hopefully now in terms of quantum science. People are always interested in the frequencies of the cymatic instrument. At one point, Peter shared several different methods with me regarding this. In particular, he stated that a tissue sample using a depth probe would be placed upon a plate, and then the plate would be vibrated with sound with particular frequencies. He told me that the point, just before the tissue disintegrated, was found to be the resonant frequency of the tissue sample. He most probably used other methods to determine the resonant frequency of different conditions, different physical structure, etc. But what I think is most important to understand is that this instrument did not simply use a single tone, as seems to be so common in sound healing these days. And once again, Peter used to tell me that the psychic Edgar Cayce said that the future medicine would be sound. And I think we're obviously in the future now when there are 3 to 5 sound healing conferences occurring within the last year. And so many, and it's great, but so many of these people are using single tone frequencies. And I'm not now going to tell you the difference between free resonance versus forced resonance, etc., but I just would like to suggest that the Cyma 1000, the cymatic instrument, uses a composite of 5 different frequencies that, at least at the time, pulsed and modulated slightly. And you'll hear Peter talk about the fact that because of these 5 frequencies, 25 different frequencies were created. And Jeff and I were talking about this, the importance of that, because through all these composite frequencies, they could really create much more of a strong resonance with a particular aspect of the human body, which I think is one of the reasons why it is so effective and so, it works so well. It doesn't just use one frequency. It takes into variance the fact that we are all unique vibratory fields, and therefore if one frequency doesn't work, another one will, or perhaps another one will. I think this inherently may be one of the most significant keys of sound healing, the multi-frequency concept. And this is due to Peter Guy Manners. And when this is validated, as is happening now, to the satisfaction of our allopathic physicians and scientists, I trust that the name Peter Guy Manners will be associated with it. The concept of multi-frequency sounds for healing. You all are probably familiar with this if you have not investigated other things. Many other sound healing phenomena use single tones. It's very, very different. So many in this world of sound healing are looking for the 3D verifiable facts about how and why sound healing works. And in regard to this, the Cyma 1000 instrument is of great interest. It reminds me a bit of Oriental medicine and qi and acupuncture meridians. As far as I know, and perhaps I'm wrong at this point in time and space, but we're still really unable to come up with a satisfying answer to how acupuncture works, at least with regard to, shall we say, an answer that would satiate the traditional allopathic medical world. Now, I know a lot of us who work with various types of sound and subtle energy, no problem. We understand that. But, you know, when they say that either Reiki or therapeutic touch or whatnot has no scientific basis, same thing with qi. It would not surprise me if the true explanations for the hows and whys of Dr. Peter Guy Manners' work came from a place that few of us know about, and even fewer of us have ever visited. I'd like to tell you a story to conclude this presentation. It's one that can be validated by almost everyone who's spent any time with him and had the pleasure of dining with Peter, and I know a few people here who will attest to this. This happened to me numerous times, and after a while it came to be expected. But I remember that first time. We were sitting together at a restaurant, Peter, my wife, his wife, and I, discussing some esoteric healing subject. Peter was calmly talking when a crash, almost as though somebody had pounded the table with their fists, and all our plates and silverware went flying up in the air. Luckily, most of the plates remained stable and didn't break. But the astounding thing was that usually at this point, several pieces of silverware had been tied in knots. We call this the Peter Guy Manners phenomena. I remember there was both, at the first time, a fork and a spoon in this condition. And we're not just talking about being bent. I'm talking about tied in a knot as though it was a shoelace. My mouth dropped open. I remember looking at Peter, who looked very sheepish and apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said. "This happens often when we go out to eat." And it did, but it never happened at my house, nor, you know, where he was staying, and not all the time, just a couple of times per visit this phenomena would occur. I believe that, Mandara, you have observed this phenomena as well. I don't know if she's going to admit it or not, but it's okay. You know, it's like, oh, wow, did you see that? Yeah. And what was I drinking? Yes, indeed. Jeff, I used to have a Peter Guy Manners memorial set of silverware. He's not dead, but it's a memorial set. They're all twisted, misshapen. And I think over the years, like many of the other objects of mine that I've collected, the silverware has become lost. But what hasn't been lost is all the teachings, information, and knowledge of Peter Guy Manners. It has been my great honor to share with you just a little bit of what I know about Peter in a very, very enigmatic way itself, in the hopes that as we proceed into the future, his name will continue to resonate as one of the founding fathers of sound healing. Thank you. And now, Saturday night at the movies. I might stand up here and make a comment or two. Let's see if we can get our sound down a little bit, hopefully. So I never used the Cymatic instrument to try it for hair regeneration.
My name is Jonathan Goldman. My guest is Dr. Peter Guy Manners. Peter Guy Manners is a doctor from England. He holds a number of different degrees, including Doctor of Medicine, Doctor of Osteopathy, as well as PhDs from both Oxford and Heidelberg University.
Isn't he darling?
He has researched and worked with Dr. Hans Jenny of Basel, Switzerland, Professor Gaveau of the Sorbonne in Paris, France, Dr. Brunner of Heidelberg, Germany, and George Delaware at the Delaware Laboratories. Now, is cymatic therapy, what is it though? Is it sound? Is it music? Is it something you play from a tape recorder? Is it?
Well, of course, when you refer to sound, everyone sort of associates it with something that you listen to. With cymatics, this is not precisely so. It is literally the transplanting or the transmutation of accepted frequencies of sound into the tissue and structure of the human being. All the areas of the body, all the organs of the body produce a harmonic, a sound. This sound is very small and very minute. This again is not a new concept, not a new theory, but it is only in comparatively recent years that technology has caught up with the concepts and the ideas of this, and we've been able to reproduce these frequencies and sounds. And now we can reproduce them, create them artificially, and transfer them back into the tissue and the structure.
There are different frequencies for different parts of the body, and that with cymatic therapy, you would somehow inject or put in the correct frequency that is needed for that part of the body. Is that correct?
That's correct. You see, every part of the body possesses a harmonic, whether it's the harmonic of the heart, the lungs, the liver, the kidney, muscles, bones, nerves, whatever it is, it produces a harmonic. This harmonic is now tabulated, we know what they are, and we can reform these artificially on a computer. Then it can be played back into the structure and the system. It is pleasant, it is easy, it is comfortable, there's no side effects. There are literally no conditions where it cannot be used, except if the patient has a heart pacer, but then that applies to all techniques of treatment if the patient has a heart problem there. But other than that, there are no conditions that can't be treated. Even in pregnancy cases, we've treated them right up to the time of delivery.
Now, cymatics, what does the word mean?
Well, in its early stages, which was now over 20 years ago, it was called sonic medicine or sonic therapy. But the general public got this confused with ultrasonics, which is quite understandable. So therefore we changed the name to cymatics. Cymatics is a Greek word meaning pressure or waves. While we are using pressure waves combined with the sound, so it's perfectly technically correct. Also, it pays tribute to one of the doctors whose groundwork formulated this concept and this therapy, and this was Dr. Hans Jenny of Basel in Switzerland. And he called his form of research cymatic research. He did invaluable work. But what we have done is to bring the research of various physicists and doctors and scientists together, the list that you've already quoted, bring those together, and out of that we have evolved a technique of treatment which is now internationally known and is used right throughout the world. Thanks to these people who have laid the foundations on which we can construct this therapy that we owe so very much to.
Doctor, what are your basic principles of using sound or cymatic therapy as a healing tool?
In the first and early days of this, we kept it locked into the use of muscular diseases, bone diseases, joint deformities, rheumatism, arthritis, fibrositis. Now, we kept it into these various diseases for several purposes. The main one was to accumulate as much information and knowledge and case histories as we possibly could to validate our concept and our theory. But also there was other things coming to the concept, and that was it was very easy to treat because you treated the surface of the body. But as it has gone along over the past 20 years, we have found now that we can treat all parts of the body, and including the internal organs. And year by year, we are having reports fed back to us from various doctors and clinics that are using the instrumentation, that are feeding back new results, and new points are coming to light.
Perhaps you could enlighten us a bit more about how exactly you could use a sound or tone to counteract a disease or something that is not balanced properly in the body.
Well, if every organ and every part of the human anatomy gives off a signal, providing all those signals are in line with the general harmonic of the whole body, then you are in good health. But if for any reason, irrespective of what it is, if for any reason any of those frequencies fall out of alignment, then you are diseased or out of harmony, disharmonic. Also, another thing which is very important is that this simplifies to a large extent the method of administering treatment or administering medicine. You see, a lot of these instruments are now being developed for third world countries. Now, we can't hope to train third world people directly into medicine over a short space of time. And if we don't do something quickly, I mean, many people are going to be in dire pain and straits of which no help is done, because, I mean, there are far too few medical practitioners to be able to deal with the amount of people that need help and treatment. Therefore, the effect of diagnosing a condition is not so vitally important. If you're dealing with it medically, a diagnosis is vitally important, because otherwise you would administer the wrong medication. But if you're dealing with some internal organ that is out of alignment and you're assessing it by its vibrational force field, then providing you can correct, or there's some method or some technique that can correct this vibrationary force field, irrespective of the condition which is causing it, you're on the right track. So therefore, many people can be helped merely by injecting the frequency back into the structure. And what also you've got to remember is that the frequency you're injecting is the natural frequency. You're working hand in hand with nature. You're not doing anything contra to nature, because the adverse condition is contra to nature. So therefore, if you're putting in the corrected frequency and signal, the human structure is very keen to get back into alignment. This is one of the principal problems that have been in the organ transplant in surgery. It is the harmonic concept. Everything is taken into consideration when a transplant is done, whether it's by kidney transplant or heart transplant. Everything is taken into consideration. But up until a short while ago, we gave no consideration to the harmonic. And therefore, if the harmonic of that transplanted heart is not in line with the harmonics of the rest of that system, we use the term, the body rejects the transplant. This is merely what it means. It rejects it because the harmonic evaluation of that heart will not fit in with the rest of the harmonics of the system in the body.
So in other words, in order to utilize a sound or a series of harmonics as a healing tool, what you would do is you would inject this into the body, and that which was diseased or vibrating out of harmony or ease with the rest of the body would somehow resonate back to its proper frequency.
Back to its proper frequency. But one thing we've got to be careful in this, you use the word inject. Now, if we use the word inject, a lot of people think we're going to stick a needle into them and inject something. We transmit it into the system. So the system is easy, there is no breaking of skin or surface, no needles are used. It is an application which is applied to the surface of the body. And if you apply sound in the audible range to the surface of the body, it will transmit itself right straight through the body and out the other side. Now, if there's nothing organically incorrect in the area through which that travels, it will travel straight through and be rejected on the far side. No harm will be done, no damage will be done. But if there's any abnormality in the frequency of the area that you're projecting the frequency field to, then it will rectify that as it passes through. And merely by simply placing the hand on the far side to which the applicator is applied, you can tell whether the condition is advanced, or whether it's very bad, or whether it's very slight. Because if the frequency signal travels through very quickly, there is very little wrong in that area. But if it takes some seconds or a minute before it travels through, then you know it's meeting obstacles on its passage through the structure.
What sort of cases have you worked with?
Well, we've dealt actually, well, I mean, over that period of time with many thousands of cases. The early work in the early days was muscular rheumatism, arthritis, fibrositis, and the point was to treat these people. Now, in advanced cases, we particularly chose advanced cases in some cases to see how long or how much improvement we could get, where medically speaking we said it was incurable and gone too far. In some of these cases, the patients had had rheumatic disorders or arthritic disorders for a period of 30 years. They were elderly people. In many of these cases, we were able to stabilize the condition and prevent further deterioration. But in lots of cases, we got improvement, and if we got cases early enough, then we got a cure. But since then, many cases have been dealt with which have no sort of relationship to the cases we started off with. I mean, we've treated heart conditions, lung conditions, bronchial conditions, intestinal troubles. Most of these conditions now can all be treated by this technique and this method. Frequencies, we tried 2 frequencies, 3 frequencies, 4 frequencies, and the patterns become more intriguing, they became different, they become, if I may dare use this word, they become almost ethereal because they become very fine and delicate, but it still wasn't what we were after. And we were almost at the point of giving up when we said, well, we'll try one more, we'll try 5. And when we tried 5 frequencies, oh, we nearly jumped up in the air because it actually happened. Enough, it formed itself up into a form defying the pull of gravity and started to form up into a holistic form and shape, 3-dimensional. This is what we needed, this is what we wanted, because this is the basic sort of formulative structure of shape and form in the human body.
And the sound creates the form.
The sound will create the form and will hold it for just as long as you want it to hold. But if you change that frequency, then it will, if you want to use a word, you will have mutation. You will change the shape. So therefore it is again correct to say, scientific fact, that as the sound, so the shape and the form. So there basically we conclude from that the human body in the form in which we see it is held in that formulative pattern and structure wholly and solely by the sound it contains and makes. Other things that we can ease and relieve pain without the administering of drugs and painkillers. It has been found and checked by specialists in London who are using this instrument that the endorphins, which are the secretion from the brain, which ease off pain, it's like nature's painkiller, is activated by the transmission of frequencies into the structure. We have used this in hospitals where patients have been injured in mining disasters where the roof has crashed in. Now, we all know medically there's very little we can do from this, or except to clean it up, make them comfortable, and give them a painkiller if necessary, and just hope that time will heal it. Well, now we can do much more than that, because for applying this frequency above the damaged area, we can deaden down to a large extent the pain, and there is no side effects as if we have given drugs to administer it.
Have you tried this in situations of cancer, for instance?
Well, now, cancer is something which unless you are an MD, you are not allowed to treat. We've got to remember that these instruments are in the hands of osteopaths, chiropractors, nurses, nurse consultants, all these kind of people who are efficient practitioners within their own rights, and they are using these instruments. Now, with this instrument, They are not breaking the law in any way, shape, or form, because we do not deal with cancer to obliterate it. We do not attempt to disintegrate the cancer. We treat the organ to which it is being troublesome. In other words, if it's a lung cancer, we treat the lung. We strengthen and fortify the lung and let the cancer take care of itself, and invariably this does happen. The instrument is so designed to make it as simple for operation as we possibly can. On this side of the instrument is a sonic computer which will formulate the basic frequencies that you require for treatment. This can be then locked into the mind of it, transferred and recorded to a magnetic tape, and it is then ready when you plug in your applicator on this side to apply to the patient. And the way we apply it to the patient is merely to switch it on and turn up the amount of output on the applicator. The applicator is then applied to the patient, but before it is applied to the patient, it's always advisable, remember we're interested in holistic medicine, and the patient is an individual, not a case. The patient is very often apprehensive, tense, perhaps tired, and in pain. And we firmly believe that an application of your hand over the area first, before any treatment is given, has a soothing effect, beneficial effect, and the patient feels more confident. Then apply the frequency field. The frequency field that you're applying, immediately it is applied, the patient will relax automatically. As you're coming to the patient, they're a little apprehensive. Once it is applied, they are perfectly content, easy, and relaxed, because the frequency you're filling in is entirely in relation to the natural frequency there. You are using a natural frequency. There is nothing injurious, nothing harmful, nothing that will do any harm at all. In this particular case, our nurse here hasn't any serious problems, but had she had serious problems and this joint was unmovable, a small application around the joint structure would ease down the tension, and after a few manipulations by the applicator, you would be able to gently move the joint without pain or discomfort. Up in the area here, which is always an area of congestion, pain, and discomfort, remember this is a very important area of the body because your eyes are controlled from here, the organ of balance is controlled from here, the facial muscles are controlled from here, and also the nerve going down the arm is all controlled from this area. It's a place where tension builds considerably. So therefore, by applying this over the area, you get a relaxed and comfortable feeling. Once the applicator is in contact with the patient, you have no further need to comfort or to reassure them. And it matters little whether it is a young baby, a small child, or whether it's an elderly patient. All of them relax, it's easy, pleasant, and comfortable. The frequency field that you are actually hearing is the sound which exists within muscle structure. That sound that you can hear is the actual sound that is contained within the muscle structure, amplified many, many thousands of times. And therefore, all that is necessary is to apply it over the area for ease, comfort, and relaxation. If they have come in and complained to you that there is pain in that shoulder and it's possibly rheumatism, they've not told you anything else perhaps, and you are treating this, they will very often say, "Doctor, I can feel something happening down in my knee." Now the reason for this being that there's possibly a slight rheumatic condition in the knee joint which they haven't necessarily told you about, but because the frequency field is traveling into the system, the whole system is consumed with it all the way around, and it will find any weakness anywhere in the body and deal with it.
So that was a film that our beloved Jeff Volk made, and And that woman that he was working on, that was Priscilla King, who was head of the Maine Holistic Nurses Association at the time. And it was really neat to see the guy who invented the thing use the instrument. For those of you who have instruments, if you haven't seen this, it's cool, huh? And then these are old instruments. I thought that the one that I had, which is the one that he was using, was kind of like the Model T version, as opposed to the Sim 1000, which is closer to, I don't know if you want to call it a, jet plane or something like that. It's a harmonic choir. No idea. Look at him wearing blue. I never saw him wear blue jeans. I never saw him. Jeff, did you ever see him wear blue jeans? It's like, God. He also looks a lot older in that picture, too. I think the Dorian Gray phenomena. Oh, okay. Oh. Right, the Merlin phenomena, that's right. Yay, there it is, huh? Whoa. Sleek. Whoa. Now we have something, we got another one. Something from, this is now in today. Yay for the relieves. I think we spelled relieves wrong, but it's okay. It's I'm gonna This is with Joanne Summerscale, 1995. Peter's home in England. The Castle Manor.
Clinic of Dr. Sir Peter Guy Manners, an eminent
Check out those
research
initials.
scientist, lecturer, and practitioner of complementary treatment in healthcare. His specialist field is cymatics and bioenergetic medicine, a treatment that places corrective, natural frequencies and harmonies into areas of the body that have been depleted due to illness, injury, or disease.
I mean, we know instinctively that pain is a registering factor telling you there's something wrong. But we also know, and I mean all the doctors will agree with this, that 75% of the body's ability is wasted on the toleration of the pain.
Yes.
And the healing is pushed back in the background. It takes longer. And also the theory of pain is basically very, very simple. It's very complicated, the person that's putting up with it, but basically, honestly, it's simple. It's a two-way sort of telephone system. We had a very good example of this with a hospital up in Sheffield. We were asked to go up to demonstrate this technique when we were in the early days of finding how it worked. And the hospital, it was a small hospital devoted to miners who had been caught in roof collapses where the things had given way, so that it was all crush injuries. And now there's not very much you can do about it apart from cleaning it up and just waiting for time and giving them some drugs to alleviate the pain. That's all you can do, really. And when I went in with this box of tricks, because that's what it looked like in those days, and this thing which in those days looked like a hammer, and these very, very tough big miners lying in those beds there, they took one look at me, and I am not going to repeat on this program exactly what they said to me. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to get very far with these men. And I was just going to say, oh, well, better give it up, I suppose. And I came down the end, and there was a young boy. He couldn't have been more than about 18. And he said, I don't know whether he felt sorry for me, or whether he was, what I say, thinking a bit deeper. I don't know quite what it was. But he said, I'd like to try it. And I said, well, good, that's fine. So, and he had a crushed leg from about just above the knee right down, and it was really a horrible mess. And anyhow, so I removed the bedclothes from the top up near the hip joint, and so he said, aren't you going to move the dressing? I said, no, no, no. I said, I'm not interested in what's happening down there. Oh, he said, aren't you? I said, no, no. And I put the appliance on the nerve centers at the top of the thigh and around the hip. And immediately I put it on. Of course, I put it on particular nerve centers, which in those days we couldn't even use by name because the medical profession hadn't accepted. It was meridian points. We called them null points because we had to be polite. And so we put it on a null point. And within a matter of a minute or two, I mean, his face, from being drawn and painful, suddenly started to brighten up. And he said, the pain is stopping. The pain is stopping. He started shouting at the top of his voice. Well, it wasn't many seconds before the whole of the rest of the ward was like a madhouse. They all say, well, I'll better try it. I'd better try it. And they're all over the place.
Bradfordton Hall is set in the heart of some of England's most beautiful countryside, the Cotswolds, nestling in 3 acres of grounds and garden that patients and visitors can enjoy. Many people come to use the hydrotherapy pool, which is also located in the gardens. Whether people use the pool for specific treatment or for enjoyment, all benefit from its relaxing effects. The water is often charged with a frequency of relaxation, and once charged, the water retains the frequency for 10 to 15 weeks, or until a different therapeutic frequency is added, in which case it simply overrides the other.
I don't think it'll be very long before it is possible for us to be able to take a blueprint, a map, if you like, of an individual, a newborn baby, and assess all its commutations or H factors, whichever terminology you wish to use, its H factors in its system, so that we know exactly what they are, and then check them from time to time. And as we do so, any variation, any change, the slight as it may be, can be rectified immediately. And by this means, we can keep the human body in perfect order for the lifespan and make this part of mankind's entry into the next century. Thank you.
And here we are now, in the next century. So I just want to give you a couple of closing words before I bring Mandara back up here again. But I want to just, first of all, thank Mandara for allowing us the time to give tribute to this man, because for those of you who are here, for those of you who have instruments, for those of you who may get them, for those of you who may tell others about them, you know, things get forgotten, and I really hope that this man and his extraordinary, extraordinary wisdom, his extraordinary, extraordinary foresight, yes, he certainly is one of the more eccentric beings I've ever encountered. But by gosh and by golly, you probably find that the same thing was true with Tesla and many other folks. Just making just wonderful, it's me, it's very scary. I didn't know that was happening. I hope it was like, good God, another eccentric indeed. But, wow. Now I have to go like this, go, whoa, look at that. Okay, sorry. Is to just remember the name Peter Guy Manners, and at some point in time and space, I know as this work continues, more of his really teachings will manifest, but they ultimately, you know, through the proper research that is going on now, I mean, thank you, Dr. Fleming, and everyone else who is doing this now, because the instrument does work. We just got to convince and just come up with the proper protocol so that something like this can be utilized in, it wouldn't it be great? Peter was talking about, you know, third world countries. And I'm sad to tell you that about a week ago, a good friend of mine died of pneumonia in Boulder, Colorado. How did this happen? Well, he couldn't afford health insurance. so he couldn't get to a hospital in time. Pneumonia in the 21st century in one of the most high class, if you like, neighborhoods on the planet, simply because of the health system. Wouldn't it be wonderful if these instruments were available to almost in every town and all these different places? So I'm just so, Mandara, I'm so grateful to you for keeping Peter's work going. Victor and Associates, I'm so grateful for you for doing the research that is going to make this stuff possible. So let us keep Peter's name and his work in our hearts and our minds and just keep it going, because the future medicine is sound. We are in the future right now, and let the sound manifest love and light and healing throughout the planet. Thank you so much.